Welcome to Relation Tales. Please like this video and subscribe Relation Tales that we're grateful for each and every one of you. Let us know where in the world you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let's begin. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The weight of everything crashed down on me at once. Brandon knew. He knew. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic rhythm of panic, guilt, and a bitter, gnawing dread. How had he found out? Steven and I had been careful. We never texted anything explicit. We only met out of town. We never lingered in the same place too long. And yet he knew. The reality hit me like a freight train. My marriage, my life as I knew it, was about to be destroyed. I was still reeling from the shock when a blur of motion jerked me back to the present. A little girl ran into the street, her ball bouncing away from her. I slammed on the brakes, my car screeching to a halt inches away from her tiny frame. She turned and stared at me with wide, innocent eyes, her chest heaving. Her mother, standing on the sidewalk, shot me a look of pure venom, as if I were the one at fault. I couldn't even process the fear. I was already drowning in my own. Brandon knew, which meant only one thing. This was war. It hadn't started the way people assume affairs do. It wasn't lust at first sight. It wasn't even love. It was exhaustion, routine, emptiness, a need to feel alive again. Steven had been a colleague, nothing more. But then, one night at a conference, after one too many glasses of champagne and a long conversation about dreams that had slipped through our fingers, it had happened. A mistake, a fleeting moment of weakness. I should have stopped there, but I didn't. The secrecy, the thrill of sneaking around, the way he looked at me like I was something new, something forbidden, it was intoxicating. I wasn't Lucy, the exhausted wife and mother of two. I was something dangerous, desired. Now, sitting in my car, that thrill was gone, replaced with a sickening knot in my stomach. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, my fingers scrolling down to Steven's name, disguised under recently hired colleague, a pathetic attempt at covering my tracks. I typed, "Can you talk?" My phone buzzed almost immediately. Steven's reply was short. Cold. Please beg him not to tell Mary, coward. Coward. That was what I was. And yet, at that moment, rage flashed through me. If my life was burning, why the hell should Steven get to keep his? Maybe I should tell Mary before Brandon did. Maybe I should set the fire before it consumed me. My fingers were still hovering over my phone when the memory struck like a bolt of lightning. The moment I walked in and saw Brandon swabbing our children's mouths. Jillian, our little girl, sat wide-eyed as Brandon pressed the sterile cotton swab inside her mouth. Peter, our eldest, stood nearby, confused but obedient, waiting for his turn. A DNA test. Brandon was testing our children. My blood turned to ice. That was when I realized it wasn't just about my infidelity. It was about them. He didn't just think I had cheated. He thought our children might not even be his. Rage burned through me. How dare he question our children? But was I in any position to be angry? Wasn't his doubt justified? I was the one who had set this in motion. Still, that image haunted me. Brandon, calm and composed, collecting evidence. He hadn't accused me outright. He hadn't screamed. He had simply started pulling at the loose threads of our life, unraveling the truth bit by bit. And now, it was all about to collapse. I couldn't go home. Not yet. I needed time to think, to figure out my next move. I pulled into an empty parking lot, my head falling against the steering wheel. Could I fix this? Could I somehow explain everything? If I laid it all bare, admitted my mistake, begged for his forgiveness, could we still have a future? No. Brandon wasn't the type to forgive. My phone buzzed again. Steven, do something. He'll ruin us both. Pathetic. He was terrified, but he still wanted me to take the hit alone. I sat there, breathing heavily, before finally typing, "I'm on my way home. Please don't do anything rash." And with that, I drove straight toward my fate. I barely had time to park before the front door swung open. Brandon stormed out. His face was unreadable, a mask of absolute control. But his eyes, God, his eyes, held something dangerous. "Stay here with the kids," he said, voice like steel. And then he was gone. Panic spiked through me. I knew exactly where he was going. Steven's house. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I try to call Steven. No answer. Damn it. I texted. Lock your doors. He's coming. But it was too late. By the time Brandon reached Steven's house, hell had already broken loose. One punch. A sickening crack. Blood. You slept with my wife. Brandon's voice roared through the night. Steven staggered back, clutching his nose, blood pouring between his fingers. His wife, Mary, stood frozen in the doorway, phone clenched in her hand, her eyes flickering between the two men. And then, the truth clicked in her mind. The phone fell from her grasp. She turned to Steven, her face twisting in fury. You cheating bastard. Steven barely had time to beg before her fist slammed into his chest. For a moment, the only sounds were Steven's pathetic, desperate pleas and the crack of Brandon's knuckles breaking his face. By the time Mary was done, Steven wasn't begging for mercy anymore. He was begging for an ambulance. When Brandon returned home, his hands were bruised, but his expression was satisfied. Pack a bag, he said coldly. You're leaving? Brandon, please. Pack a bag. And that was it. I was thrown out like garbage. The next morning, I sat in a cheap motel room, staring across the breakfast lounge at Steven. His face was swollen, bandaged. He looked as miserable as I felt. But the nightmare wasn't over. By midday, we were both fired. The COO called us in, no pleasantries, no sugarcoating. We don't keep people like you employed here. By the time I left the office, I was jobless, homeless, and completely alone. And the worst part? Brandon wasn't done with me yet. Not even close. The motel room smelled of stale coffee and bad decisions. I sat at the small, wobbly table, staring blankly at my phone. Not a single missed call. Not from Brandon. Not from my children. They were gone. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I did this. I had no one to blame but myself. But even knowing that, the pain was unbearable. Across the room, Steven sat on the edge of his bed, a swollen mess of bruises and bandages. He'd barely spoken since we were both fired. His wife had kicked him out before the blood had even dried. His friends? Gone. His family? Silent. We were alone. But the worst part was, I didn't even want to be in the same room as him. I had ruined my life for this. A man who looked utterly pathetic now, who I couldn't even stomach to be near. I had traded a decade of marriage, 2 beautiful children, and a husband who once adored me for this moment. And I had lost everything. You haven't eaten all day, Steven muttered, breaking the silence. I turned my head slowly, barely able to look at him without resentment boiling over. Neither have you. He sighed. Maybe we should leave town. I barked a bitter laugh. And go where, Steven? We have nothing left. No jobs, no money, no. He shifted uncomfortably. I still have some savings. I looked at him for a long moment. Once upon a time, I might have felt comforted by that. But now, I felt nothing. Because even as I sat in that miserable motel room, I wasn't thinking about Steven. I was thinking about Brandon and what he was planning next. I finally mustered the courage to text Brandon. Me? Can we talk? Please. Just once. I stared at the screen, waiting for those 3 little dots to appear. Seconds passed, then minutes. Nothing. Then, suddenly a response. Brandon, you made your choice. Live with it. My breath hitched. Me, please. I need to see the kids. Silence. Then another message. Brandon, the kids are fine. They don't need you. I gasped, my hands trembling as I read those words. No, this wasn't happening. He wouldn't do this. He wouldn't just cut me out of their lives. Me, you can hate me all you want, but don't take them away from me. Please. We can work something out. I watched as the message was read. But this time, no response came. Brandon had made his first move. He was going to erase me from their lives. And I was powerless to stop him. The next morning, I drove to our house. My house. My family's house. But as soon as I pulled into the driveway, I saw it. The locks had been changed. My stomach twisted violently. I rushed to the front door, knocking frantically. No answer. I knocked again. And then, through the window, I saw them. My children, sitting at the breakfast table, eating pancakes, smiling, laughing. And across from them sat another woman. Blonde, beautiful, younger. and wearing my husband's t-shirt. My breath caught in my throat. Oh my God. Brandon had replaced me. Overnight. And my kids were accepting it. They were moving on without me. I stumbled back from the door, nausea rolling through me in waves. I felt like I was suffocating, like my very existence was being wiped away, piece by piece. I turned, staggering back to my car, tears burning down my face. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized something terrifying. Brandon wasn't just punishing me. He was erasing me. And if I didn't do something fast, I was going to lose everything. I called Brandon again. No answer. I texted him. Ignored. I called Mary, Steven's wife, the only other person who might understand the hell I was in. Straight to voicemail. The town had shut me out. I was a ghost. My last hope was to show up at Brandon's office, but when I arrived, I wasn't even allowed past the front desk. I'm sorry, Mrs. Gallagher, the receptionist said with a forced smile. But Mr. Gallagher has made it clear that he has nothing to discuss with you. Mrs. Gallagher. The name felt foreign now. I clenched my fists. Please, just let me see him. Her expression didn't falter. I'm afraid that's not possible. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I was begging, and it wasn't getting me anywhere. That was when I realized begging wasn't going to work. If I wanted my life back, if I wanted my children back, I was going to have to fight. And if Brandon wanted war, I'd give him one. I went back to the motel and did the one thing I never wanted to do. I called a lawyer. But after 10 different calls, the answer was always the same. Sorry, we can't take your case. Unfortunately, we're not available. We don't represent clients in your situation. Brandon had gotten to them first. The entire town was his. I slammed my phone onto the nightstand, my whole body trembling with fury. Steven sat up from his bed. What happened? I turned to face him, my voice shaking with rage. He's making sure no one will help me. Steven sighed, rubbing his temple. You don't think I'm dealing with the same thing? I can't even find a damn apartment. My credit card was canceled. My family won't speak to me. We're both screwed. I clenched my jaw. No, we're not. Steven frowned. What do you mean? I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. Brandon had money, influence, connections. But there was one thing he didn't have. My rage. And that was about to become his worst nightmare. I sat in that dingy motel room for what felt like hours, staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror above the dresser. This wasn't me. This broken, pathetic woman wasn't who I was supposed to be. I had lost everything. My home, my kids, my marriage. But the worst part? I had lost control. Brandon had taken everything I held dear, and he had done it with surgical precision. He hadn't just thrown me out. He had systematically erased me. He had locked every door, shut every window, and burned every bridge before I even had a chance to fight back. And I had let him. No, no more. I took a deep breath, my fingers curling into fists. If Brandon wanted me to disappear, he was going to be sorely disappointed. Because I wasn't going to sit back and let him win. I was going to fight. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I needed information. If Brandon was turning my own children against me, if he was making sure I had no legal recourse, I needed to know how far his reach went. There was only one way to find out. I grabbed my purse, slipped on my coat, and stormed out of the motel. Steven called after me. Where the hell are you going? I didn't answer. I didn't have time to explain my plan. Not that he would be much help anyway. He was just as much of a mess as I was, if not worse. I got into my car and drove straight to the one place I swore I'd never return to. My old house. Brandon's house now. The place where my children were sleeping, under a roof that no longer belonged to me. The place where another woman had taken my place. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep going. I had to see this with my own eyes. I parked down the street, far enough away that I wouldn't be seen. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but as I stared at the warmly lit windows, I realized something chilling. My kids weren't just adjusting. They were happy. Through the sheer curtains, I could see them playing in the living room, laughter ringing through the air. And there, sitting beside them, was her, the woman in Brandon's t-shirt. I watched as she tucked Jillian's hair behind her ear, as she helped Peter with something on the table, as she laughed at something Brandon said. My replacement. My chest tightened, my vision blurring. How long had this been going on? Had he planned this all along? Had he been waiting for an excuse to shove me out of the picture so he could bring her in? Had I been so blind that I hadn't seen this coming? Rage burned through me, white hot and suffocating. I wasn't just being erased. I'd already been replaced. I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity, watching them through the window. How did this happen so fast? How did I go from being a wife, a mother, a woman with a life, to this, to a forgotten shadow? Brandon hadn't just moved on. He had been waiting for this. It all made sense now. The coldness in his voice when he threw me out, the way he never even looked back, the fact that the locks had been changed overnight. This wasn't an accident. This was calculated. I had been so busy drowning in my own guilt that I hadn't even considered the possibility that he had his own skeletons. That maybe, just maybe, he had been waiting for a reason to throw me away. And if that was the case, I wasn't going to beg for my life back anymore. I was going to take it back. I turned the keys in the ignition, my hand steady now, my mind clearer than it had been in weeks. Brandon had started this war. Now I was going to finish it. I wasn't stupid. I knew I couldn't just march up to my house and demand my life back. That wasn't how this worked. Brandon was methodical. He had already made sure I had no legal leverage. He had painted me as the unfit mother, the reckless wife. If I wanted to destroy him, I needed to be smarter than him. And the first step? Find out who that woman was. Because if she had been in the picture before my marriage fell apart, then Brandon wasn't just the victim of my betrayal. He was a cheater too. And if I could prove that, I could take everything from him. I spent the next week tracking her down. It wasn't hard. In a town like ours, people talked. Her name was Rebecca Martin. She worked at a small marketing firm downtown. Single. No kids. And the most interesting part? She had been seen with Brandon long before my affair ever came to light. I found a local bar where some of Brandon's old colleagues hung out. I nursed a drink in the corner, listening, waiting. And then bingo. Two men, laughing over their beers, talking about Brandon's new girl. I knew he'd end up with her. One of them chuckled. The other took a sip of his drink, smirking. He was practically living in her office before his wife got caught cheating. But she didn't even see it coming. My heart stopped. I leaned in, my breath shallow. Wait, the first guy said, grinning. Are you saying he was with her before Lucy got caught? The other guy laughed. Oh, way before. I saw them at that hotel on Fifth last year. Thought for sure his wife would figure it out, but I guess she was too busy with her own fun. Ice filled my veins. Brandon had been cheating first. Before I had even thought of Steven, before I had even made my first mistake, he had already made his. He had destroyed our marriage long before I did. But he let me take the fall. He let me be the villain. And I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The realization hit me harder than anything else had. Brandon was a liar. Not just a wronged husband. Not just a man who had been betrayed. He was a manipulator. He had orchestrated this entire downfall, knowing full well that he had already broken our marriage before I had. Let me take the fall. He let me be painted as the unfaithful wife while he played the victim. He let me drown in guilt, in self-hatred, in regret, while he locked the door behind me and moved on seamlessly. How long had he been planning this? Had he been waiting for me to make a mistake? Had he been setting the stage for my downfall? Rage built inside me, slow and seething, curling around my ribcage like a wildfire waiting to ignite. Brandon thought he had won. But now, I was going to burn his world to the ground. I couldn't confront him outright. Not yet. Brandon had too much control. He had already stacked the legal system against me. He had the entire town in his pocket. And he had my children believing that I was the villain. I needed to be careful. I needed to be smart. And most of all, I needed proof. So I did what Brandon never expected me to do. I started digging. I spent days tracking down every little breadcrumb of his affair. I found old receipts from expensive restaurants, ones I had never been to. I dug through his old emails, his social media activity, and the paper trails he thought he had covered so well. And then, finally, I hit the jackpot. A hotel receipt. From a year ago. Brandon Gallagher. One-night stay. With Rebecca Martin. The proof I needed. I stared at the paper in my hands, my heart pounding. This wasn't just evidence. This was power. Brandon had been cheating long before me. And now, I was going to make sure everyone knew it. I started small. Whispers. Hints. Subtle little drops of information placed in just the right places. I accidentally let slip to an old mutual friend that Brandon had been acting strange long before my affair came out. I let it slip that he had spent quite a few late nights out of town. I let people draw their own conclusions, feeding them just enough information to make them start to wonder. And then, when the time was right, I went for the kill shot. I sent the hotel receipt anonymously to the town's most notorious gossip. And then, I waited. It started with whispers, then quiet conversations, then full-blown accusations. I sat back and watched as the town turned on him. People who had once defended him, who had shunned me without question, started to hesitate. If he was cheating first, does that mean he framed Lucy? Wait, he had a whole other relationship while calling her unfaithful? What if he did this on purpose? And then came the real moment of reckoning. Brandon's new perfect little life? It started cracking. Rebecca confronted him first. I knew she would. A woman like her? She had signed up for the fantasy of the perfect, wronged husband. She had no idea that she was just a chess piece in his game. So when she found out that he had been cheating on me with her for over a year, she lost it. She showed up at his office, screaming, throwing things. She called him every name in the book. And then she left. And just like that, Brandon was alone. His perfect, rebuilt life, gone. His reputation as the good, upstanding man, destroyed. The man who had built his revenge so carefully, so coldly, was now standing in the ruins of his own destruction. And I wasn't even close to done yet. I finally got a call from Brandon. I let it ring, and then I let it ring again, and again, until finally, he texted me, "Brandon, we need to talk." Oh, how the tables had turned. I met him at a neutral location, our old lawyer's office. Brandon walked in looking different. He wasn't the smug, confident man who had thrown me out of my own home. He wasn't the man who had stood by, watching as I lost everything. He looked defeated. I leaned back in my chair, watching him with quiet amusement. "You seem tense, Brandon," I said smoothly. He exhaled sharply. "What do you want?" I tilted my head. "What do I want?" I smiled. "I want my children back." He flinched. "They don't even ask about you anymore," he muttered. That stung, but I didn't let it show. I folded my hands on the desk, looking him dead in the eyes. "We both know you were cheating first." His face paled. "Lucy." I cut him off. "I have proof. I have the receipts, the dates, the hotel records. The town knows." His jaw clenched. "What do you want?" I smiled again. "I want joint custody. I want my name cleared. I want you to fix what you broke." Brandon stared at me for a long moment. And then he laughed. "Jesus," he muttered. "You really are something else." I leaned forward. "You try to destroy me, Brandon." I tilted my head. "But guess what?" I smiled, slow and cruel. "I'm still standing." Brandon didn't have a choice. His reputation was already in flames. The town was whispering. His ex-mistress had left him. His perfect world was crumbling. And now, he had to play nice. A month later, the custody agreement was official. Joint custody. He had to fix my reputation. He had to let me back into my children's lives. And the best part? He hated every second of it. The first time I picked up my kids again, I cried. I held them tight, whispering apologies they didn't even fully understand. But I would make them understand. Because I wasn't the villain anymore. I was their mother. And I had fought like hell to be here. Brandon tried to ruin me. He tried to erase me. But in the end, I had taken everything from him. And I had won. Game over.